Tottenham did not lose this match because of tactics, formation, or personnel. They lost it because the club has forgotten what conviction feels like. There is a difference between losing a football match and surrendering one. What happened at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday evening was not a contest decided by margins. It was an exhibition of psychological vacancy, a football club operating without internal belief, direction, or purpose. Core analysis. Let us be precise about what this result actually represents. This is the fourth consecutive defeat to the same opponent across all competitions. The last club to beat Tottenham 4 times in a row was a different era, a different squad, a different reality. That statistic alone should alarm anyone invested in this institution. But statistics only tell you outcomes. They do not tell you why. The psychological truth exposed on Saturday is far more uncomfortable than any scoreline. Tottenham entered this match needing something intangible, not points, not progression in a cup competition. They needed evidence that they still possess the capacity to compete when circumstances demand it. They needed a performance that could convince their own supporters, their own players, and perhaps most critically, themselves, that this squad has not already mentally surrendered the season. They provided the opposite. What emerged in the opening 45 minutes was a team devoid of urgency, operating in a strange state of detachment that has become disturbingly familiar. There was movement without purpose, passing without penetration, defensive organization without concentration. This is what happens when a squad no longer believes in what they are being asked to execute. Thomas Frank spoke before this fixture about the FA Cup being a good opportunity. Those words now carry an almost tragic weight. An opportunity implies the capacity to seize something. What Tottenham demonstrated was an inability to locate basic competitive instinct in a match that represented their final realistic chance at domestic silverware. Consider the broader context. This is a squad that watched their previous manager win a European trophy and then depart. That same group then witnessed their captain, the most influential attacking presence at the club for a decade, leave for another continent. They have operated under a new head coach for barely 6 months, navigated a managerial philosophy shift, and endured an injury crisis that has stripped the squad of core personnel for extended periods. None of that excuses what we witnessed. But it explains something crucial about where this football club currently exists psychologically. There is a phenomenon in sport that occurs when institutional turbulence exceeds a squad's collective resilience. Players begin to operate in survival mode rather than performance mode. They conserve energy. They avoid risk. They play within themselves. This is not laziness. It is psychological self-preservation, and it has become endemic at Tottenham. The second half produced something superficially encouraging. A goal, increased intensity, pressure that actually threatened to produce an equalizer. But this only reinforced the psychological problem rather than contradicting it, because it demonstrated that this squad possesses the technical capability to compete. They simply lack the psychological infrastructure to access it consistently. Why did that intensity only emerge when defeat was imminent? Why was there no urgency in the opening period when the match was still balanced? These are not tactical questions. They are questions about competitive mentality. And the answers reveal a squad that requires external crisis to generate internal motivation. That is an unsustainable way to operate at this level. Football rewards teams who impose themselves from the beginning. It punishes those who wait for circumstances to force their hand. Tottenham have become a reactive club in an era that rewards proactive thinking. The confrontation between players at the final whistle told its own story. Frustration boiled over in the wrong direction. Rather than channeling disappointment into accountability or resolve, it manifested as interpersonal conflict. This is symptomatic of a dressing room under strain. Players searching for external explanations rather than internal solutions. Aston Villa, in contrast, exhibited everything Tottenham lacked. Clarity of purpose, defensive discipline without desperation, attacking efficiency without overexertion. They arrived at an opponent's stadium knowing precisely what they intended to do and executed it with minimal deviation. That is what psychological conviction looks like in practical terms. Villa are not a more talented squad than Tottenham on paper. They are simply a club operating with unified direction under a manager who has embedded his principles deeply enough that they function automatically under pressure. Unai Emery has built something that transcends individual performances. He has constructed a collective identity. Tottenham possess individuals. They do not yet possess an identity. This is the inheritance Thomas Frank received and has been unable to alter in the months since his appointment. The Danish coach arrived with a reputation for pragmatism and tactical flexibility, qualities that were supposed to stabilize a club in chaos. But pragmatism requires a foundation to build upon. Flexibility requires players who can execute multiple systems competently. What Frank inherited was a squad that had been stretched psychologically by the previous 18 months to the point of mental exhaustion. A Europa League triumph had masked how damaged this group actually was. Winning that trophy papered over cracks that have since become chasms. The coffee cup incident earlier in the week became a symbol of this dysfunction. A manager photographed with rival branding in a moment of carelessness that spoke to a loss of institutional awareness. It was a minor error amplified into a significant controversy because everything at this club is now viewed through the lens of decline. That is what psychological erosion creates. Every stumble becomes a scandal. Every poor performance becomes a crisis. The margin for error shrinks to nothing because there is no reservoir of goodwill remaining. Frank cannot afford mistakes that other managers absorb routinely because the environment has become unforgiving. Saturday's defeat officially ended Tottenham's domestic cup ambitions for another season. They exited the League Cup earlier. Now the FA Cup is gone. The Champions League remains mathematically possible, but practically improbable given current form and the quality of opposition ahead. What remains is a Premier League campaign that appears destined for mid-table mediocrity at best. And the psychological impact of that reality is already visible. Players are no longer performing like individuals fighting for something meaningful. They are performing like employees serving out a contract until something better arrives. This match revealed another uncomfortable truth about the relationship between supporters and squad. The boos that rained down during and after proceedings were earned, but they also deepened the psychological wound. Players who already lack confidence rarely discover it under hostile scrutiny from their own fans. Tottenham have entered a cycle that feeds itself. Poor performances generate negative atmosphere. Negative atmosphere undermines confidence. Reduced confidence produces worse performances. Breaking that cycle requires something more fundamental than tactical adjustment or personnel changes. It requires a collective recalibration of what this club believes it can achieve and why that matters. Villa's victory was deserved not because they played brilliantly. They played efficiently. They played with the conviction that they belonged in this fixture and that they had earned the right to impose themselves. Tottenham played with the demeanor of a club unsure whether they have any right to expect anything from themselves. That psychological gap is wider than any points difference in the table. It is wider than the gulf in recent form between the two sides. It is the gap between a club ascending with unified purpose and a club fragmenting under accumulated pressure. Morgan Rogers continues to torment this opponent in ways that defy individual explanation. His involvement in 5 goals across 4 appearances against Tottenham is remarkable. But it is also instructive. Certain players develop psychological dominance over certain opponents. Rodgers has found something in Tottenham's defensive structures and mental approach that he exploits instinctively. That does not happen against clubs operating with psychological clarity. It happens against clubs who carry fear into contests, who remember previous failures and subconsciously anticipate repeating them. The halftime analysis will focus on formation. The post-match debate will center on individual performances. Pedro Porro will face scrutiny. Questions will be asked about defensive concentration. But all of that misses the essential point. Tottenham's problem is not tactical. It is existential. This is a club that no longer knows what it is trying to become. The attacking identity of the Postecoglou era was abandoned alongside the manager. The pragmatic stability that Frank was supposed to provide has not materialized. What remains is a void where philosophy should exist. Players cannot execute systems they do not believe in. They cannot find motivation for objectives they do not value. They cannot perform with conviction for a club that appears to lack conviction about its own direction. Saturday's defeat was not a single result. It was confirmation of a trajectory that has been visible for months. Tottenham are drifting, and drifting clubs do not recover simply by changing managers or signing new players. They recover by rediscovering collective purpose, by establishing internal standards that exist independently of external circumstances, by building psychological infrastructure that can withstand pressure rather than crumbling beneath it. That work has not begun at Tottenham, and until it does, results like this will continue regardless of who sits in the dugout or who wears the shirt. The season is not over in mathematical terms. Matches remain. Points are available. European football might still be salvaged through one route or another, but psychologically something more significant has concluded. The belief that this version of Tottenham can compete when stakes are elevated has been thoroughly disproven. That belief may have been illusory all along, but Saturday removed any remaining doubt. What happens now is not about the next fixture or the January transfer window or whether Thomas Frank survives until February. What happens now is a question of whether this institution possesses the capacity for honest self-assessment, because the psychological truth revealed on Saturday evening is not complicated. Tottenham have become a club that hopes for positive outcomes rather than expecting them. They have become a club that fears elite opposition rather than relishing the challenge. They have become a club where individual survival has replaced collective ambition. And that cannot be fixed by formations, substitutions, or motivational speeches. It can only be fixed by confronting the reality of what this club has become and deciding whether that reality is acceptable. The final verdict. When a club loses 4 consecutive matches to the same opponent across 2 seasons, the explanation is never tactical. It is cultural, and cultural decay does not respond to managerial changes. Tottenham did not lose to Aston Villa on Saturday. They confirmed something their own supporters already suspected but refused to accept. This is no longer a club in transition. This is a club that has forgotten what ambition requires. The scoreline will be discussed for a day. The implications will linger for years.